Mary and Peter had spent countless days grieving the loss of their only son, Michael. The pain of losing him in that tragic car accident was unbearable. Every day, they made the trek to his grave, speaking to him, bringing fresh flowers, and remembering the joy he had brought into their lives. But after a month, something strange started happening, something that neither of them could explain. Every time they visited, a fresh red rose was placed on Michael's tomb. The mystery was unsettling. Who was doing this? It wasn't the work of a stranger, and it wasn't just a random act of kindness. It had become a routine. Every time the rose withered, another one appeared in its place. And then came the realization someone was visiting Michael's grave, leaving these roses just for him. At first, Mary and Peter tried to ignore it. They convinced themselves it was nothing more than a kind-hearted gesture from a stranger, someone who simply wanted to honor Michael. But over time, the consistency of it all grew too much for them to ignore. Why was this person so intent on keeping their son's memory alive, and why hadn't they ever seen them? Peter, always the more determined of the two, knew he couldn't let this go on without an explanation. He was certain that there was someone behind it all, someone who had their own reasons for placing the roses every day. It became an obsession for Peter. He couldn't help but wonder if it was a friend of Michael's, someone who had been deeply affected by his death. Finally, Peter came up with a plan. He decided to set up a camera at Michael's grave. He didn't want to invade anyone's privacy, but his desire for answers pushed him past that. He needed to know who was doing this, and more importantly, why. The next night, after Mary had gone to bed, Peter quietly slipped out of the house. He drove to the cemetery, careful to keep his actions discreet. Under the dim light of a small flashlight, he set up the camera, ensuring it had a clear view of Michael's tombstone. He left the cemetery feeling a strange mix of excitement and unease. The next day couldn't come fast enough. When the following afternoon arrived, Peter could hardly contain himself. He was both nervous and eager to finally uncover the mystery. He met with Mary, trying to act casual, but the weight of the camera footage in his bag made him restless. They planned to watch the footage together that evening, and as the hours passed, the anticipation built. Mary, sensing something was different, didn't ask too many questions. She knew Peter had been struggling with his grief and was just as curious as he was. It was clear to her that something about this mystery was gnawing at him. At last, the time came. They sat together, the room dark except for the glow of the laptop screen. The video began to play. They both held their breath. The footage flickered as they watched the empty grave for hours, the camera only showing the surroundings. But then, something caught their attention. The screen shifted, and a figure in black appeared at the edge of the frame, walking cautiously towards Michael's grave. Mary gasped. Peter froze. The person moved with purpose, though their face was hidden. They were dressed in all black, wearing sunglasses and a scarf, their features completely obscured. Whoever it was, they were clearly familiar with the cemetery. As the person placed a single red rose on the tombstone, Peter's heart raced. Who was this person, and why did they come so regularly, never revealing themselves? The video footage ended with the figure turning away, leaving without a trace. There was no way to identify them, no name, no clear evidence of their identity. The mystery deepened. Who could it be? And what were they trying to convey by leaving the rose every day? As Peter and Mary sat in stunned silence, their minds raced with questions. Was this someone from Michael's past? A close friend, perhaps? A lover? Or was it someone who had been secretly watching over Michael's grave out of a deep sense of grief? The next day, as they discussed the footage over breakfast, Peter couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The person in the video had seemed so familiar, yet so distant. How could they know Michael's grave so well? It seemed like they had been coming here for a long time, yet they had never been seen until now. Peter's curiosity grew stronger by the hour. He knew he had to find out who this person was, and more importantly, why they were leaving roses for his son. The need for answers became a burning desire. But as much as he wanted to know the truth, he was also afraid of what it might reveal. Would it change the way he remembered Michael? Would it open old wounds that were too painful to heal? Days passed, and Peter couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The footage had shown nothing but an enigma, an unknown figure who seemed to care more about Michael's grave than anyone else. But why? Why leave roses day after day without revealing themselves? Who were they to Michael? Determined to uncover the truth, Peter returned to the cemetery one evening. The security camera had already been installed, but this time he brought Mary with him. The idea of confronting the mystery together gave him a sense of reassurance. He wasn't alone in this. They had been through so much already, and now they needed to find peace not just for Michael, but for themselves. The night was cold, and the air was thick with the scent of pine. As they approached Michael's grave, the silence seemed to stretch around them. No sounds of birds, no distant chatter from the other graves, just the eerie stillness of the night. The camera would be on. They were both aware that whoever had been leaving those roses might appear again tonight. The tension between them was palpable as they waited, hearts pounding in their chests. Then, just as the clock struck midnight, a figure emerged from the shadows. Peter's breath caught. This time, he could see the person more clearly than before. A tall woman, draped in black, her face still hidden behind a scarf and sunglasses. She moved silently, as if the earth beneath her feet did not dare to make a sound. Mary's hand tightened around Peter's as they watched in silence. She felt the same unease creeping up her spine, but there was something else, something that made her want to understand, to know why this woman was here. The mysterious figure bent down and placed a fresh red rose on the grave. Her actions were graceful, deliberate, as if she were performing a sacred ritual. Then, just as she stood up to leave, something caught Peter's eye. He could see the faint outline of a necklace under her scarf, something that seemed strangely familiar. Before Peter could react, the woman turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows as quickly as she had come. But Peter had seen enough. There was something about her, a presence, an energy that was undeniable. He was certain now that this was not just some random person placing roses on a grave. This woman knew Michael, and she had a connection to him. Peter and Mary quickly approached the grave, their footsteps barely making a sound. The rose lay on the stone, vibrant and red against the cold gray marble. They looked at each other, wondering how much they could handle. How much of Michael's life and death was still hidden from them? "Who is she?" Peter whispered, his voice full of urgency. Mary didn't reply at first. She was staring at the rose, lost in thought. Finally she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know, but I think we're getting closer." The mystery had only deepened, but now they were closer than ever to finding out the truth. The woman's repeated visits were no coincidence. There was something about the way she placed the rose, the care she took it, was as if Michael's memory meant more to her than anyone else could understand. For the next few days, Peter and Mary continued their routine, visiting Michael's grave at the same time each evening, hoping to catch another glimpse of the mysterious woman. The days dragged on, the anticipation building with each visit. They were desperate for answers. Then, one evening, Peter got a call. It was from an old friend of Michael's, someone he hadn't spoken to in years. "Peter, it's Steve," the voice on the other end said, his tone serious. "I think I know who's been leaving those roses at Michael's grave." Peter's heart skipped a beat. "Who?" There was a long pause before Steve spoke again. "It's someone from Michael's past, someone he was close to, someone who disappeared after Michael's accident." Peter felt a chill run through him. "What do you mean, disappeared?" Steve sighed. "She was Michael's girlfriend, but after the accident, she just vanished. No one heard from her again, I thought. I thought she might have just moved away, but it seems like she's been visiting his grave all along. It's her. Her name's Lily." Lily! The name hung in the air like a cloud. Peter felt like he had been hit by a freight train. Lily, Michael's girlfriend, the girl who had been so close to him, who had shared so many memories with him, but who had somehow disappeared after the accident. Why hadn't they known about her? Why had she stayed away? Peter's mind was spinning with questions, but Steve wasn't done yet. "I've got one more thing, Peter. I'm not sure if you're ready for this, but I think you should know. Lily, she's been carrying guilt for Michael's death. She blames herself." Mary, overhearing the conversation, gasped. "Guilt? But how? It wasn't her fault." Steve's voice was heavy with emotion. "She thinks it was. There was an argument that day. Michael was supposed to meet her, but he didn't show up. She was waiting for him, thinking he had changed his mind, and then the accident happened." Peter's heart sank. All these years they had never known the full story. Michael had never mentioned Lily, and now they understood why. But they still didn't know why she had been visiting his grave, leaving a rose every day. What did it all mean? The next day, Peter and Mary drove to the address Steve had given them. They needed to find out the truth. The journey was filled with uncertainty, but they couldn't turn back now. When they arrived at Lily's house, the door was opened by a woman with pale skin, long brown hair, and tired eyes. She looked like someone who had been carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders for years. Lily. She had been waiting for them. Lily stood there, looking at them with a mixture of sadness and relief. "I knew you'd come," she said softly, her voice trembling. The weight of years of guilt and silence seemed to hang heavily in the air between them. Peter and Mary looked at each other, uncertain of what to say next. The truth was finally in front of them, but it felt like a lot to take in. After all these years of wondering, of seeking answers, here it was, right in front of them. Lily invited them inside, and as they sat down, she explained everything. The argument, the guilt, the silence. She told them how Michael's death had shattered her, how she had blamed herself for not being there, for not being able to save him. She had been visiting his grave every day, leaving a rose, not just as a tribute, but as a way to atone for the love she lost. Mary and Peter listened in silence, their hearts heavy with understanding. They had lost Michael, yes, but in that moment they realized that Lily had lost something too. It wasn't just a grave they had all visited, it was the shared grief that had bound them together. With tears in their eyes, Peter reached out and took Lily's hand. "We never knew, but we understand now," he said softly. "We can't change the past, but we can move forward together." And so, in that small, quiet moment, they found a new kind of healing, not just for Michael, but for themselves. The pain of the past would never disappear, but it was no longer a burden they had to carry alone. Together, they could honor Michael's memory and find peace in the truth that had finally come to light.